You're watching
State of Real Estate. Every Friday at 12 noon Eastern Time. Grow your real estate business. You're watching State of Real Estate. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of State of Real Estate. My name is John Christman. The show is brought to you by the Tampa School of Real Estate. Let me know in the chat if the audio is coming through loud and clear. I don't know if you guys could see this here. We broke the little clip for this here, and of course we don't have a spare one anywhere, so I've just got it tucked through this little buttonhole in my shirt. So hopefully the audio is coming through okay. If not, I apologize in advance. But let me tell you something. The information that we have to share today is going to be invaluable, really, for anybody in real estate, just because there's really been so much sensationalism and overcomplication regarding this whole NAR settlement, NAR lawsuit. What does it even mean to be part of the NAR or to be a realtor? And the number one mistake that the general public makes as it relates to the real estate industry and people that work in the real estate industry is assuming that all real estate professionals are in fact realtors. Whereas a realtor is not necessarily just somebody with a real estate license, but somebody with a real estate license who has become a member of the National Association of Realtors. And you might ask, and this is a common question that we've gotten for years with people starting in real estate, is what about the board fees? What about the MLS fees? Are those required? And the short answer is no. But the long answer, especially with what the MLS used to be, it kind of was of like, yeah, you kind of need this thing because without it, you've got to go get your own commission agreements. But now the one thing that really made the MLS what it was known for has been pulled out from underneath it. And we'll talk about more about that here and really why this is such a significant advantage for real estate professionals rather than anything that is necessarily going to hinder your success. And especially if you're brand new to real estate, this is honestly who it's going to be benefiting the most is new real estate agents. Real estate agents that have already had a real estate license who have not been using buyer representation agreements are going to have the most difficult time adapting to this change. But the thing is, a lot of real estate professionals already were using buyer representation agreements. And so with your buyer representation agreement, it essentially establishes your employment with the client. Because if you don't have an employment agreement, if you don't have some sort of employment contract, you're not really employed. And that's been the state of real estate for far too long. So, I don't know, I was one of the people that was relatively excited about these changes here. You know, I thrive on change. I actually love change. I embrace change because whenever change does occur, whenever these sacred things that are believed to never be unchanged change, it's those who have a fresh set of eyes, who have that fresh perspective, who understand what this could really benefit as, who will succeed the most. So welcome in. This is live today, so if you do have any questions on this here, is there echo? This has an echo. All right, let's double check here. I don't know, this microphone here. Let me know in the chat if you guys are hearing any sort of echo. Let me double check some things here, make sure we only have one microphone on. Look at this setup here. And there should be a chat right on the side of the video. If you guys are not watching on the official live broadcast, make sure this link works here so you'll end up in the right place. Participate and ask whatever questions you have about this here. And whether you're brand new to real estate or you already have a real estate license and you're just trying to navigate this change here, if you've already have a real estate license, the one thing you've probably already noticed is the elimination of the compensation fields in the MLS. And you're like, oh no, there's no compensation in the MLS. How do I know what I'm getting paid? Well, that's where you call the listing agent. Now let's go back to the whole again, reason why a lot of real estate professionals even buy into the MLS in the first place is so they don't have to make that call. Because previously in the MLS, you could go in there and see what the compensation was, and you should still have a buyer brokerage agreement. I've always been pro and for buyer brokerage agreements, the buyer representation agreement essentially, because again, it is your employment contract. So this is very important for you to have a quality relationship with your client that has clear, specific details outlined of what that relationship actually looks like. So I've been an advocate for buyer representation agreements for quite some time. Our post-licensing course, if you have your real estate license, make sure you get this done as soon as possible, because when you go in through this here, you get right into working with buyers. I believe it's Unit 8. Yeah, Unit 8 is on working with buyers, and it walks through the whole process from finding buyers, different sources to leads, to having the first conversation with them, to getting that buyer brokerage agreement signed. And so I highly recommend you take this course as soon as you get your license. Don't wait before the renewal deadline, because you'll miss out on so much valuable information as it pertains to actually starting your real estate career and starting your business. But again, we've had this in the curriculum for years. I'm a broker with multiple broker licenses as well, and that's a requirement at my brokerages, is if you're working with a buyer, that you're using a buyer brokerage agreement. And this was a requirement that we enforced even before this whole NAR stuff, because that's really just going into effect tomorrow. It was just this spring that there was the whole settlement of this lawsuit, and this did not change any actual Florida laws. This did not create any new statutes. There is nothing new from the Florida Real Estate Commission as it pertains to this here. This only creates the requirement as it's outlined so far. And so if you're in real estate and you've heard of it, this creates this requirement for subscribers to the MLS, because the MLS is not a governmental entity. The realtors are not a governmental entity. They are not part of the government. They have no authority to create laws or rules, but what they can do is create rules for its members. And so I want to cover a brief history on the origins of cooperation. So back in the day, and so this is what we're getting back to. We're getting back to basics. You know, it's like the Old West. I should have brought one of my cowboy hats in today here, because it's like we're going back to the Old West here. Because back then, if you wanted to sell a house, you didn't even need a real estate license back then. You could just go into the trade of real estate, and you'd go find somebody and say, I want to be in real estate. And they'd say, okay, we're going to sit you here at this open house. And that open house would be an open house basically every day until that agent sold this open house, this property. And now the open houses were actually a pretty compelling thing, because back then, you know, people would just go build their own log cabins if we're really out in the country here. And so the big draw was actually the electricity, the light bulbs in there. So people would say, come inside, look at the light. Wow, look at this. This could be your home with light. And then also all the indoor appliances, ranges, rather than having an ice box, actually having a refrigerator. All these things would come and be these modern conveniences that would essentially drive people to want to come to these open houses, to look at these properties here. And again, in real estate during this time, like again, you go way back to when electricity was first the thing, open houses again were the prime thing. But now once electricity was kind of sweeping the nation, so to say, and more people had it, it wasn't the draw to get people into the open houses. And so real estate agents looked to innovate. And they said, well, if I've got a 6% commission negotiated right here, it was actually another agent that approached the agent that had this open house. And this agent said, do you want to split the commission? I have somebody that might be interested in your property. You want to split the commission? Are you willing to cooperate with me? And this is now, over 100 years later, the world that we now find ourselves in, probably 150 years later now, that we're in this world where there is no longer a centralized database of listings that include compensation information. And at the end of the day, as an independent contractor that gets paid based on the transactions and the sales, it's important that we ensure that we're going to get paid. And that's where you have contracts and documents for that, aka the buyer representation agreement. So if this agent has negotiated 6%, now this agent could keep all that 6% for themselves. If that's the way they want to write this up, if that's the way they're going to do the deal, that's really the market it is that we're in here, because the thing that was really kind of antitrust about the MLS was the fact that even until recently, they made it where you had to have at least a minimum compensation of $1. They did take that away, but it was too little too late, and now that basically says of the court ruling that they can't have any compensation. You can't have any mention of compensation in the MLS, and even if you put it somewhere in there in the MLS, you could get fined by the MLS. So you're paying to join this association that will fine you. Now, on the listing side, I've yet to find a better way to be able to syndicate your properties to all the different portals that are out there, but you absolutely can. So again, the MLS is no longer the obstacle, the hurdle, the requirement, so to say, even though it wasn't really a requirement, that it used to be if you want to actually get into real estate. Now, the catch is, and the MLS is still doing this, because back in July, there were actually a couple agents at my own office that were not able to pay their subscriber dues. And what the MLS actually does, these people that created all these rules of compensation, and I'll get off my soapbox on the MLS for a second here, but what they do is they shut down the entire office. Everybody's access gets suspended until these members that haven't been paid their bill either essentially get fired from the brokerage or the bill gets paid. And so they don't take the past due bills lightly. That's about after 60 days past due, that's where they shut down the brokerage. A couple weeks after the 60 days past due. Before the end of July, because it happens every year like clockwork, and even this year, when agents are struggling more than ever. But I digress. This is the association you all join to benefit you. So think about that. And as a new agent, if you're going into a brokerage that does require you to join the MLS, maybe consider some other options that don't include MLS membership. Because again, if you've got to have this same conversation that we were having back in the 1800s, at that point, we're really, what other benefits? And there are tools, there are all kinds of things in there which, when you're actually selling real estate, the $1,000 or so it costs a year, those tools are definitely valuable and can be extremely worth it. Even without compensation in there. But again, for the new agent, for the agent that's struggling to be able to afford these MLS dues that they kick you out of the brokerage over, or they suspend everybody's if you don't get kicked out of the brokerage. And the thing is, we still got to go back to having these conversations with agents. Now, the requirement of the MLS, and this is the big thing here, going back to buyer representation agreements here, if you're a member, if you're a participant in the MLS, you agreeing to their ethical codes, which more so come from the realtors and the rules of the MLS, that's where you're agreeing that you are required to use buyer representation agreements when showing property. Otherwise, you can be fined, not by the government, but by this association that you voluntarily join. I just want to make sure everybody is clear on, again, what this actually creates here. Because I foresee 5-10 years down the road, there might not even be MLSs anymore. And, you know, I think their hands are tied, really. I mean, the best thing they could really do at this point, if anybody from the MLS is listening to me and like, oh, listen to this guy trash talking us right here. Look, the best thing you could do, to where I have always gotten value from these tools, is making these tools easy to use. There's been a lot of pivots recently, at least, and I'll give Stellar MLS, the one that's the middle of Florida here, a lot of props for a lot of the improvements in technology that I've seen recently, to where there are some very valuable tools inside of your MLS subscription that could replace your website, your CRM, your contract management and transaction management. So that's really, I think, where the MLS will still have a place in the future. But if they really don't double down on that, and for the MLSs that don't double down on offering really that whole suite of tools that make your job as a real estate professional easier, that's where you'll have a lot more people that are going to choose to be non-members, to be non-realtors. You could still be a real estate agent. You could still be a real estate sales associate. You could call yourself anything except for that trademarked term of realtor. And you could still sell real estate. So that's a huge misconception that a lot of people have, is this whole illusion that the realtors have done a very good job of creating. I mean, realtors of the National Association have done a very great job of creating the illusion that realtors and real estate agents, or real estate sales associate, real estate licensees are similar and one and the same. And at the same time, they have a lot of branding as like, oh no, not every agent is a realtor. And yeah, that's true. Not every agent is a realtor. So what about those agents who aren't realtors? What are they doing? Well, before, we'd have the luxury, if we had the MLS, we'd be able to just go in there and see what that compensation is. Now, we make a phone call. We make a phone call. And so if you are a participant of the MLS, this is where, we'll keep it on the same visual right here. This is where your buyer representation agreement comes into play. And so this buyer representation agreement, if you're a subscriber and a participant of the MLS will require you, otherwise they will fine you. And so you're required to have this buyer brokerage agreement in order to show properties. Now, what if you're not a member of the realtors in the MLS? Could you just call that agent and ask for a showing? Absolutely. You're going to see that on the listing side change to where the listing side could be a little bit more hands-off before. It's going to be a little bit more hands-on, and that's good because the listing agent should be more involved. You're still going to make a ton of money. It's still probably going to be less work than working with a buyer, but you can make a much more valuable contribution towards the sale just because this whole new arrangement really ingrains you into that negotiation position. And there's really two schools of thoughts on this. There's some sides of this that are saying, okay, well, because of this, we can't put it in the MLS. What's the point of even offering compensation anymore? And at the same time, there's an email that I got the other day from, it's like Zip Your Flyers, or one of those little services that spams out flyers to everybody that's opted into some list somewhere that's been resold off to this whole place there. And so you get these little flyers. Zip Your Flyer, I know, is one of them. There's a bunch of different ones out there. And basically, these flyer services were, you know, in my mind, it's something that's going to definitely get you more attention. But what's the point of sending out an email, to mass email to a bunch of realtors? Well, yesterday, I learned that new potential of this program to where the subject line was 5% commission. I was like, ooh, let me open this one. Now, can you do that? Can you put 5% commission in an email? Well, are you offering 5% commission? Because as long as the seller has agreed to offer that commission, doesn't that kind of incentivize you? If you're seeing a property, that's the whole argument here. This is literally what the Department of Justice has said, is because the MLS, it's an antitrust thing because it's multiple businesses using the same system. And because it's multiple businesses using the same system, that's why they're able to apply these antitrust rules and why you can no longer have commissions in the MLS. But there can still be an offer of compensation by the seller, and you can still legally disclose that information. You could even advertise that information. You just cannot do so in the realtor systems because compensation has been forbidden. The realtors are not allowed to talk about compensation at all. That's what this court case has came into play here. The Realtor Association, one of the things they do is advocate for us. And I guess what they want to do here is make it so the Association of Realtors can't advocate for our compensation. Because that's what this effectively does. It puts the compensation fully under your control. Now, when you talk to this buyer here, we'll say that's you there as the agent. Here's the buyer. It's a tall guy. A little bit taller than you, but that's okay. We're going to find him a house with those 8-foot doors. And so we're presenting this buyer agreement to our buyer. And we say on here, you know, my standard rate of commission that I charge is 3%. And we explain in this buyer agreement, we don't go just right to, okay, before I show you this house at 3% if you want to work with me. No, they're not going to work with you. They don't want to talk to you. They'll hang up on you, close the door on your face, drive off, whatever it may be. Because what have you done to show your value other than be a gatekeeper? So if that's all you envision yourself as a real estate professional, whether you're aspiring or currently in real estate, is just being a gatekeeper, just being a lockbox controller, somebody that could open a lockbox, if that's all you are, you're not worth 3%. I wouldn't say you're worth 3%. I wouldn't pay 3% for somebody that's just going to open a lockbox for me. But for somebody that's going to counsel me, that's going to guide me, that's going to open my eyes to programs and opportunities and things that I wouldn't know otherwise, that could be worth something. That could be worth something very valuable. And on top of that, you know, if I know this might be different from when you've done a home before. There's been some changes legally, some new case law with the Association of Realtors that requires us to have a buyer representation agreement before I could show you the property. Now, if this 3% here, if that ends up where we find a listing where the seller is not willing to contribute any compensation, any credit towards that 3%, you know, we could maybe renegotiate that down the road. But I'm confident that we could at least get a portion of this fee negotiated in. Because even if you approach somebody that says, oh, I'm not paying out anything, I'm not paying any commission, well, how about if we give you a full price offer? Would you pay some commission then? That now just becomes part of the negotiation. So with this here, and you're doing this on behalf of your buyer, because otherwise, if there's 0% being offered by the seller, that means on top of the sale price, the buyer does have this 3% that they're having to pay on top of the actual sale price. Which, with as high as home prices are right now, with insurance rising, with interest still being pretty high, even though it has came down, that could be a make it or break it for the deal. And that's why negotiating this, that the seller kicks over some of this here, is a smart thing to do. Now, at the end of the day, again, whatever commission you could get is going to be better than no commission, but you want to know your value. And not just know your value, but show your value. You've probably heard people say that before, that, oh, I know my value. And you've probably thought, well, you sure aren't showing it. So just because you know your value doesn't mean that that's necessarily being shown or showcased. And it's not any attack on you personally. But again, having that outside perspective that could kind of evaluate you, and whether it's a friend, a family member, somebody who is going to give you honest feedback, you could maybe identify some areas where you could show your value more. And one of the prime ways to do that is having a strong buyer presentation. So listings have long been a coveted thing by many real estate professionals, because overall they do take significantly less time to close than the average buyer, about a third of the time that a buyer takes on the listing for actual work being done. And on top of that, as long as you get the property sold, it's pretty much a sure thing. And why listings have always been so coveted is because you negotiate the commission in advance. Well, that's exactly what you do now with the buyer. And because of this landmark ruling with the Association of Realtors, this all of a sudden went from being something obscure that people like me would say, oh no, we got to have a buyer agreement, to now being something commonplace and pretty much standard operating practice. Now, like I said, if you're not a participant of the MLS, do these rules apply to you? Well, if you're not a participant of the MLS and the realtors have no authority over you whatsoever. Now, the Florida Real Estate Commission, that's a different story. Any level of the government, that is a different story. But this lawsuit wasn't against real estate licensees. It was against realtors. The Association of Realtors. And so ultimately, whether or not you're a realtor matters less now. If you're getting started in real estate, if you're trying to get back into real estate, if you're trying to do business without access to the MLS and the tools. And I'm very excited to see the rise of this, counterculture, for lack of a better term, of real estate business that's going to get done without the MLS, without the realtors, and it's going to be driven by people that are again trying to innovate and find better, easier, faster, more straightforward ways to be able to do this business. It's been going on since even before electricity was in the houses. So let's head over to the live chat over here. Again, join in live at tsre.us. And you can hit the chat button on the side with any questions that you have regarding this here. Let's see. Okay, awesome. Glad the audio is coming through good. Yeah, so right on the side of the video, you have to kind of hover over it or click on it, tap it with your finger, and it'll pop up, and you'll see the live chat. So whatever questions you have about this, and if you don't have a question, let me know. Are you brand new to real estate, or are you already in real estate? Do you already have a real estate license? And if you are already in real estate, is this change freaking you out, or is it something that you're excited about? Or maybe you're neutral. Let me know what your feedback is on that there. And also, if you're brand new, again, what where you're at in this process, what maybe has been holding you back from taking that next step. We are live today. We will send out a recording of this probably later this afternoon once it's all processed and cleaned up nicely. And so that way you could review this here. And if you want to know more about the process of working with a buyer, we could spend a little bit of time talking about that. If you want to know more specifically about the representation agreement, more about when would be the opportune time to introduce that representation agreement, we could even kind of do a brief outline of that working with buyers section that we cover in the post licensing here to give you some really good insight if you haven't taken this course yet on what that ideal process kind of looks like working with a buyer. And again, if you're tuned in over on Facebook or YouTube or Instagram or wherever else we may be live streaming today, head over to tsre.us/live. That should take you right over here to this live broadcast here. Passed my exam yesterday. Congratulations, Lisa. Yeah, Lisa, and so the thing is, and so for everyone that may be in Lisa's shoes, that you just passed your exam, you're wondering what to do next, this is where I'd really research the different brokerages that are out there. And because this whole concept is so new, any brokerages that exist that are not members of the Association of Realtors, they have existed for a very long time, but all of a sudden that's something that is a much more valid way to get into real estate versus having to lay out $1,000 for a year when you're starting part-time and you're not sure if you're even going to get a deal in your first year. Ultimately, you want to, but you know the market is, there's all kinds of things going on that could affect that as well, on top of you just figuring everything out yourself, on top of what else you might be doing to do this part-time. So again, it creates a lot of worry, and when you throw $1,000 on the line, now that 1 year goes by so quickly, and all of a sudden they're asking for more money. They actually bill every 6 months with the Association of Realtors. It's split up, though, into like half and half, essentially. Half for your MLS, half for the realtors. So they want to keep that money coming in because ultimately it does fund all the different operations. But again, going back to, as a new agent, can you be successful without that? It's more possible than ever now. Just because that advantage you would have of having the MLS and not having to have those awkward conversations. Because I remember when I was in real estate, and I remember getting this question for years about, what if I don't want to join the MLS? What if I want to join a Thompson brokerage? There's a lawsuit way back called the Thompson brokerage where it basically said you could join an MLS without having to join the realtors, but everyone in the brokerage must apply. That's basically the rules the realtors have, is that it has to be all the same within that brokerage there. So if that brokerage is a member of the Association of Realtors, then all of its agents must be members of those Association of Realtors. And so if you are looking to join a brokerage that is not a member of the Association of Realtors, it will rule out a lot of brokerages, because most brokerages, especially the ones that you know of, all the big brands, all the franchises, they're all members of these Association of Realtors. And as a matter of fact, some of these large franchises were included in this lawsuit here. Don't quote me exactly on this here, but I believe some of the names were Keller Williams, Berkshire Hathaway, who else was included in there? I want to say even Compass might have been included in that. Remax was included in Realogy, which is like a parent company for a bunch of different franchises. So does it make the most sense to join a franchise that's having to pay these huge settlement lawsuits? Because that's your future profits. If you join into one of these organizations that have to pay these fines and fees, that's your money. That's because those fees haven't been paid. They're to be paid in the future. And so that's something to where, again, you've got to make the smart move for your career. And I'm not here to be an advocate for the Association of Realtors. Full disclosure, I am a realtor myself. Hopefully I don't get in trouble for what they're having me say here. But honestly, as somebody brand new to real estate, you do need to know this. You do not have to be a realtor to be able to practice real estate legally in Florida. We cover that actually right in the pre-licensing course to get your real estate license. Now, there is one FREC rule that says you cannot call yourself a realtor. It specifically says you cannot use a trade name. You cannot use a trade association name, aka realtor. That's really the main one that's out there. There's a few other like small ones out there, but realtor is the main one. That's the largest trade organization in the world, is the Association of Realtors. But I believe that they've peaked, because them being the largest trade organization in the world, what is the benefit of continuing to be a member? That's the question it is. And for someone new in real estate here, maybe you don't want to go right into drinking the Kool-Aid of doing this here, and maybe a year from now, people are going to watch this video and laugh at me and say, look at this wacko over here is talking about how the MLS might not even be necessary. So I'm out on a limb here, trying to pull back the curtain on what the MLS and the realtors really are, and are they really even necessary? And they would love for you to believe that it is a requirement, so much so that if you join a brokerage that is a member of the Association of Realtors, it is a requirement. Otherwise, they'll suspend everybody at the brokerage. So that's a fun thing that they do there. But it's because of their ethical standards and rules that they want to make sure are enforced uniformly and across the board. And they won't let you call yourself a realtor if there's another person in your office who hasn't gone through all these ethical trainings and standards. So is it good for the marketplace? It can be. Is it necessary? Not according to the law. And that's what we're here to talk about. That's what we teach at the Tampa School of Real Estate, is we teach the law. That's primarily what you learn about in this pre-licensing course. This course for post-licensing, that gets a little bit more into business. So Lisa, now that you've passed your exam, before you even get into a brokerage, this would be the key thing that I would do. And for anyone that is still thinking about joining the Association of Realtors, it's like I said, even though it's not necessarily a requirement, there is a lot of training. The MLS has a lot of really good features. But understand that that is like $1,000 that you're committing to in a subscription type of basis here. And that quickly becomes a drop in the bucket, because there are a lot of other things that they provide, the contracts, the forms, the standardization of things, which does help the business flow smoother here. But there's places like New York City, for example, doesn't even have an MLS, just because everything is so segmented and broken up. So there's a lot of examples of this throughout the country here. But point being, that if you want to practice real estate with or without the MLS, this information, the business planning that you do, this is your post-licensing, this is what you've got to do for your first renewal, but you don't want to wait until your renewal, because that's like 18 months after you get your license, and you'll miss out on a lot of really valuable information in this here. So this post-licensing course, and let's just jump into the buyer section here, and I'll just go over some of the headings on this here, just so you can get a feel of the information that's taught in here, because if you've gone through this is laws, this is rules, this is a lot of exam prep material of information that the Florida Real Estate Commission wants to make sure that you know in order to be able to practice real estate legally. But now Unit 8 in your post-licensing course, these are our instructor-led programs here. So we have this video on demand, in person, and live online. And so this whole working with buyers section, the first part that you're covering here is on product knowledge. So actually knowing about real estate, and this is the stuff that you could have already done in advance, like things like watching HGTV and these house flipper shows, and just knowing about that product that is real estate and buildings. And I don't want to use the word construction, but even like basic construction terms, like this is a bay window, and that's a cathedral ceiling, or whatever thing it is that you're describing in there. And you don't need to go overboard with this, but it does help out when you know more about the product than your clients. So that's a good position to be in. You do ultimately want to know that. And then once you know enough about real estate to be able to get somebody to buy it, next section move on to is finding buyers, where we cover all kinds of different methods for prospecting. There's actually a whole section here earlier, a few sections actually, a whole one just dedicated to prospecting for business, specifically with listings, but you can use a lot of those same methodologies on the buyer side as well. And for new agents, the #1 source of business for new agents actually comes from your sphere of influence. Whether that's a friend, a family member, a friend of a friend, a coworker, a friend of a coworker, somebody's brother's mother, sister, but somehow by association of you being personally introduced, that's how 80 to 90% of new agents get their first deal. So that's one of the top ways that you learn about in this here is sphere of influence and circle prospecting. But it also goes into if you're doing any sort of advertising. And advertising could be as simple as making a social media post, which is actually free, or it could be even more complicated, more advanced, maybe more money behind it, doing direct mail campaigns, postcards, making a website, lead generation, pay-per-click ads. There's a lot of different ways you can generate buyers. become very easy because all kinds of people want to buy a house. Now, not everyone will be qualified, and so that's actually part of this process here is handling the qualification. So you learn about all different types of calls you could get. So calls from an ad, calls from a sign if you do actually have any sort of listings, and how to convert that person that might be interested in your property and might actually buy that property you have for sale, but more than likely they might want to buy another property. And that is another benefit of the MLS, is having quick access to so many different listings, especially when it comes to showings. Because that whole lockbox system, that's another thing of the realtors. And can you get access to a lockbox without the realtors? They make that really difficult to do. Is it possible? Probably, some way, somehow. But ultimately, that subscription there, it gives you a lot of tools to help standardize the process, but compensation can no longer be standardized, essentially. That's the whole result of this ruling, and that's the whole antitrust thing behind this, is the standardization of compensation. Even though there was still individually negotiated out commissions, ultimately it was this third party that was housing and distributing this information, and that's what, in this court ruling, they said no more. But again, if you want to be able to put that in an email that you blast out to your list of agents, you could do that. You could put that in the email there. You can't put that in the MLS. They'll fine you if you put that information anywhere in the MLS, but the MLS doesn't own your email. The MLS doesn't control your email. And so ultimately, the whole thing about this ruling here, at least as the rules are right now, that it's related to the MLS. But ultimately, your seller can still offer compensation. You can still tell people, whether that's over the phone, you're putting a sign in the yard that says 5% commission, or whatever it is that you're doing, you could do that. Now, ultimately, does that incentivize agents to bring buyers? Absolutely. That's the whole point of it, right? Because if there's no pay, and the buyer's having to pay this all out of pocket, they might like that house, but they might not like it enough to be able to pay their agent out of pocket on top of what's being asked for the property. And so that's where it still does make a lot of sense for a seller to be willing to offer. And even if, they're only kicking in, say, 1% or 2%, at least something that you're trying to negotiate. You maybe go into the negotiations with, say, a full price offer with 3%, and you maybe land somewhere, maybe $1,000 under with a 2%. Or again, it gives you another point to be able to negotiate there, so that way your buyer doesn't have the sole cost, bear the sole cost of having to reimburse you. And it all just comes out to the accounting side, because at the end of the day, it is all the buyer's money. It's the buyer's money that's paying for all of this here. So even the listing agent's commission, even though that's billed on the seller's side there, the buyer's still the one that's providing all this money, either through themselves directly or through a lender. But anyways, back to working with buyers here. So you've got all these different opportunities. So again, friends and family, coworkers, open house visitors, canvassing, door knocking neighborhoods, turning renters into buyers. That's a huge thing. There's a lot of first-time home buyer programs that you could learn about. That's more the product knowledge aspect. Again, qualifying. Not all buyers will be qualified, but that doesn't mean that you fall out of contact with them. That just means that you work with them, just not looking at houses yet. Let me follow up with you in a month. Keep paying those bills, pay that down, and I'll follow up with you next month. We'll see where we're at. We'll have Bob at ABC Mortgage go ahead and pull it again and see if you're in a better position. How does that sound? Okay, matter of fact, I might just give you a call next week, check how you're doing. If there's anything else that came up, send it your way, get your thoughts on some things, because that's the name of the game. It's follow-up. It's staying in touch with people, because that's where most agents go wrong, is they talk to somebody once and then they just hope for that person to call them back. You want to go into this assuming nobody is ever going to call you back. And so don't ever ask somebody to call you back. Don't ever expect somebody to call you back. You call them. That's a lot easier, because you can make sure that you call them. Will they answer? That's a different story, but at least you could be in control of making that call rather than sitting around staring at your phone hoping somebody's going to call you. And that's exactly what the buyer brokerage agreement is doing as well. It's putting you in control of the transaction, because you're outlining the representation, you're outlining what you're going to do, you're outlining what expectations are of your client, and you're putting this all in writing. Now, ultimately, what if they go work with somebody else? You could go sue them off of your contract, but you probably don't want to be in the business of suing clients. That's probably not the best publicity stunt for you. So how do you avoid, better question is, how do you avoid those clients even wanted to talk to another agent? Well, number one, you outline that right in the beginning, that, hey, I'm your agent. All the other agents out there will be trying to take advantage of you to earn commission, to get you to pull some sort of fast one on you or anything like that. We're having this conversation now. There's going to be no other real estate professional that's going to know your wants, needs, and desires and what it's going to take to get those than me, because of what we establish here today. How does that sound? Perfect. So anything about real estate, come to me first. Let me get you the information. Let me get you the facts that I can. And you know, if you ever want to get a second opinion from an appraiser or lender or anything like that on some of these other topics, I highly recommend that as well. But if it's anything related to real estate whatsoever, come to me first. So at least get you pointed in the right direction. Make sure you're not getting misinformation. There's so much misinformation out there today. There's misinformation everywhere on the internet. There's misinformation in the minds of all these real estate agents out there. So come to me first, so that way I can make sure I get you the right information. And when you take that position of honesty, integrity, and really truly serving the client, they're going to be afraid to work with any other agent, because they're like, wow, look how good Joe does. Look at how much Joe takes care of me. I would never trust anybody but Joe with my real estate transactions. That's the type of relationship that you want to build, and you have the framework for that now with this buyer representation agreement, because this is no longer a weird thing that like you're like some hippie trying to get somebody to sign off on some agreement. Come on, man, sign the agreement. It's going to be good for both of us. Now there's that discussion is, you know, there's some legal changes, and before I show you properties, the MLS actually requires me to have a buyer representation agreement. And that's going to be the same for any agent. You actually get fined for showing properties if you're a subscriber to the MLS and you do not have a buyer representation agreement. So that's why we're having this discussion here today. Bit of a formality, but honestly, I love this because it gives a great opportunity for me to outline everything it is that I'm going to do for you, and then everything that I need from your side to be able to make sure that we could work together to make your dreams a reality. How does that sound? Easy. Little things like that you can take this thing, and rather than saying, this is just something legal we've got to do, sign this here so I can show you the property, and turn it into, again, a catalyst for an amazing relationship ahead. So let's head back to the chat here, see what other questions we've got from the chat here. Again, getting into the broker, the post-licensing as soon as possible. If you're just signing up, you don't even have your pre-licensing done yet, we have a package called the Complete Jumpstart where you can get a pre-order discount essentially for paying for this in advance. So call our advisors, 813-333-2676 with any questions you have. So what else we got here? Thank you, Donna. Glad you're enjoying it. Latrice starting on September 9th. Congratulations. And you know, it's always nervous. No matter what's going on in the world, in your world, this is always a nervous experience. It's a lot of potential change, and it might feel a little bit weird at first. I'll be honest with you. It felt weird for me at first. I didn't think I was going to make real estate a lifetime career, but here I am all these years later. So, you know, maybe not actually just selling real estate, but there's so many things, whether it is through, say, education. You know, we're always expanding here at the Tampa School of Real Estate. It could be into other related fields. A lot of people go into investing. They use real estate as a stepping stone to be able to build up some capital, learn the real estate industry, and then start investing in real estate themselves. So we've had countless students approach this from that angle. So that could be a really great way to go through this year. 86% of the way through the course. Congratulations, Lynn. That is amazing progress. And Lynn, don't worry about it. These news headlines. Half the time I'm like arguing with my phone screen. I was like, what are they talking about here? This is because there's just such sensationalism and clickbait that's out there. And again, that misinformation, that's not just for buyers and sellers. That's for us too as real estate agents. The news reporting agency, they're not realtors. They're not real estate scholars. They're not real estate instructors or real estate brokers. They're just reporting on what they've heard. And so there's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of confusion. And on top of that, because this is a national subject, there's a lot of confusion across state lines. Because Florida definitely has regulations, but compared to a lot of other states, there's significantly less regulations in Florida compared to a lot of other states. There's a lot of other states that have significantly more regulations. We hear this all the time from our students that have had licenses in other states that are getting their Florida real estate licenses. Like, wow, this Florida seems a little bit simpler. And it's almost confusing at first how much simpler, especially the whole concept of transaction broker. If anybody coming from out of state, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. I was like, oh yeah, that took me a while to figure out there, especially if your state defaults to single agency. But anyways, You'll learn more about that in your pre-licensing if that all sounds like gibberish right now. You'll learn about that. Those are the different types of relationships that you have with your client. Yeah, and so the representation agreement, I don't think we have a sample one in here. We have a couple appendixes with some samples of stuff, but let me see. Don't think we, oh wait, actually, there's a sale contract. Property disclosure, listing agreement. I'd be surprised if they don't have a buyer brokerage agreement. But it might have been just because they just updated this, and they've actually been updating this here because of all of these changes. But essentially what you're going to find in any buyer brokerage agreement, and this will be one of the things if you are considering a brokerage that is not a member of the Association of Realtors. So the realtors aren't just for the MLS. They're not just for the lock boxes and all the other tools that you have access to through the MLS. But on top of that, what the MLS also does is it gives you all kinds of data and information and also contracts. The actual agreements that you're using with clients. And so there is a standardized realtor buyer brokerage agreement. Now, if you are joining a brokerage who is not a member of the Association of Realtors, so therefore you don't have to be a member of the Association of Realtors, that brokerage will have to have their own buyer brokerage agreement. And we actually have in the pre-licensing course in Unit 11 where it actually covers about the essential elements of the buyer brokerage agreement. So let's actually reference that here. And I'll maybe elaborate because this one is pretty basic. But here are the bullet points of what needs to be in a buyer brokerage agreement. So maybe we've got some brokers that are watching that are thinking, maybe I want to start up another brokerage. Maybe I want to have multiple licenses like John. Because if you're a broker, you can have as many broker licenses as you want, as long as you're the broker. If you're a broker associate or a sales associates aren't allowed to open their own office. But even if you have a broker license, if you're a broker associate, that means your fiduciary responsibility is tied to your brokerage. But when you're a broker, you could have multiple broker licenses. And there's many brokers already that have two different brokerages. They have one brokerage for members of the Association of Realtors and another one, it's typically from a referral standpoint, where a lot of these firms, they don't actually allow you to practice, but they do allow you to refer out business. But those ones are not members of the Association of Realtors. And so you would get a separate license for that. You don't have to take another course. You just get your broker license once, and then you request as many copies of that license as you want. You'll have a different license number for each one. And what that allows you to do is open up another brokerage that's up to you if you want to make that brokerage a member of the Association of Realtors. So if you don't, understand that, and this is why a lot of those non-realtor brokerages are just for referrals, because referrals are very simple. All you need is a one-page referral form to be able to do a referral. A buyer brokerage agreement, here's what are the basic core elements as told by your pre-licensing course. Again, that focuses on the laws and rules, so this is the basic of the basic for buyer brokerage agreements. Number one, you need the parties and the term of the agreement. So that means who is the client, the buyer, the prospective buyer, and then who is the brokerage. And also maybe who is that agent representing them at that brokerage there. In addition to that, you have the general characteristics of the property being sought by the buyer, including the type of property, price range, and location. Keyword, price range. Approximate location. The type of property, that might even, if you have somebody who's maybe looking at a single family home, you could maybe put single family or townhouse, because maybe they might consider a townhouse, or maybe single family or condo. Or maybe you have that discussion right off the bat to completely eliminate those and only look at single families. So I would, just as a general advice here, this is something you're not going to find in pre-licensing. This is going to be more like a topic you'd hear about in that presentation of the buyer brokerage agreement in your post-licensing. And essentially, you don't want to be too narrow with your parameters on this agreement, because to a certain degree, this is also a legal document as well. And if you make that too specific and you put these parameters and they end up buying this thing here that's outside of those parameters, you could box yourself out of a commission. So you want to be specific enough, but not overly specific. So again, price ranges, approximate locations, or similar, something like that. Single family home or similar, around 2,000 square feet, approximately 4 bedrooms, 3 baths, just little verbiage like that you have in there as it relates to this here. And so you'll find in the buyer brokerage agreement that's offered by the realtors, it's a very standardized document, but there is, at least from previous versions, but even with the current version of the buyer brokerage agreement, there's some things that you might want to do differently. And that's where it might make sense, and maybe you're hiring an attorney for your brokerage to be able to draft a better buyer brokerage agreement. But the benefit of your brokerage having its own buyer brokerage agreement is you don't have to rely on the one from the Association of Realtors, and therefore that now frees you from that need there. So is it possible to be able to run a full service brokerage without the Association of Realtors or MLS? More possible than ever. So I'm really excited to see what this brings to the market, because competition always improves the marketplace. Competition will always make it better. Maybe not better for the competitors, but it will make it better for the consumers. That's why antitrust laws exist. So also what we've got on here, broker's obligation. So like I said, what it is that you're going to do, what value it is that you're providing to this experience. Then you also have the buyer's obligation. So again, what are their expectations and what do they have to do? Again, anything about real estate, come to you. They want to go visit an open house. Send me the info in advance so I can get you some information. And if you need me to come along, I can. If you want to check it out in advance, that's fine. Communication is key. You don't have to be with your client at every single showing. You should. That would be ideal if you could be there with them. But let's say they do want to go to a random open house. Don't say they can't go to open houses. Say, hey, just reach out to me first so I can get you some details, get you the info on it. Don't worry about it. Even if you're, just kind of interested on it, keep me in the loop. The more information I have, the better, and the more it is that I could help you. Deal? So that's how you're having that obligation discussion, and it's more clearly outlined in your buyer brokerage agreement. You have retainer and compensation. And you might say, John, what do you mean retainer agreement? Yes, retainer agreements. And this isn't even new to buyer brokerage agreements. This has been in the standard buyer brokerage agreement as long as I remember them. Now, do people ever use retainers? I've never seen an agent use a retainer. But now with buyer brokerage agreements being thrust to the forefront, maybe retainers make a comeback. And so if you want to charge a retainer up front, you can do that. That's, not typical, not standard, but that's the whole point of this here, is we're not dealing off of standards. We're making our own thing. We're making our own agreement. So however it is you want to conduct business, you could do it that way. The compensation. So again, such as that 3% that we talked about earlier here, this 3% that we talked about. We're securing that with the buyer. We're not just relying on the MLS and what the seller's already pre-negotiated. We're making that agreement directly with the buyer. And again, this has such an opportunity and the power to be able to create a very strong relationship with you and your client. You also have here the protection period. Now, protection period, what that means is, let's say you show them this house. And then for so many days after your buyer brokerage agreement expires, if they transact to buy that house, you may be entitled to compensation. I feel like one of those auto injury accident commercials. You may be entitled to compensation if somebody buys a house that you showed during the protection period, unless they signed a new agreement with another agent. And in that case, your protection period is usually void. Now, could you have an attorney draft up something different than that? Maybe, but that's how the realtor one works, basically, is the protection period is void if they transact with a buyer brokerage agreement with another real estate agent, even if it is the same property there. And then you also have early termination of the agreement and dispute resolution. So are you going to charge some sort of cancellation or early termination fee? And even if you don't plan on charging that, that could be a way to be able to secure somebody and say, hey, look, normally I charge a $4.95 cancellation fee, but because I really like you and I don't want you to feel pressured, I'm just going to waive that entirely. How does that sound? That sounds great. Cool. Sign right here. You might not have had any intention to charge them that cancellation fee in the minute, before that, but the fact that you're showing I could charge you a cancellation fee, but I'm not. Like, oh, wow, look at that. John's already looking out for us. Exactly. I am. Because other agents might try to hide their termination fee in there and not even bring it up. I'm not even going to charge you guys one. That's how much I believe in you. I feel like we've got a great relationship. I trust you. I feel like you trust me. I don't want to put anything in the way of that trust. I'm just going to waive any sort of cancellation fee. How's that sound? Does that make you comfortable enough to sign today? Great. Go ahead and sign right here. Go ahead and click this box here. Approve that signature. There you go. Whether you're doing paper or the e-sign. And then you also have your authorized brokerage relationship. So are you doing the default? In Florida, we have a default relationship, and that's because there's so much business being done without buyer brokerage agreements. We have a default of transaction brokers. So if you're not a participant of the MLS and you're out showing properties without a buyer brokerage agreement, you do still default to that transaction broker relationship there. Now, if you're a member of the Association of Realtors, they're going to come looking for you. They've already found the form. They got a form right there front and center on the website. Go report anybody showing properties without a buyer brokerage agreement. And it's funny because they actually say licensed sales associate on there, so there was a couple other typos they had in that were a little bit more obvious, but they only have authority to enforce these rules over participants of the MLS. And it actually says that in their actual formal rules, that participants of the MLS are not allowed, because you agree to participate in these rules unless you find a way to be able to practice real estate without that. So whatever that might look like for you, if you're starting in real estate, or maybe you're a brokerage that's starting and that you want to have an option where they're not a member of the Association of Realtors, you will need one of these buyer brokerage agreements. You don't technically need it because the law doesn't require it, but you still want to use these anyways because it's going to be an industry common standard practice. And if you don't have one of these, you are basically your client is a free agent. They could go join whatever team that they want because they haven't signed on with anybody in particular. And then there's also the other forms and documents, the listing agreement, the as-is sale agreement. So those contracts, those very quickly pay for themselves from your realtor dues, again, once you're actually selling. But if you're starting out part-time, consider the referral options, consider the non-MLS, non-realtor options, consider those other options, but most importantly, take the post-licensing as soon as you get your real estate license, so that way you have a business plan, you understand what those next steps are and what type of brokerage is going to be the best fit for you. Because it turns out it might actually be one that is a member of the Association of Realtors, because you do want to have the lockbox access and the MLS. Even though it doesn't have compensation, it still has a ton of other stuff in there that are valuable tools for you as a real estate professional if you're practicing real estate. If you're not diving straight into real estate and trying to go all in on that, getting homes sold left and right, again, consider that referral option at the very least, or again, one of those full service Thompson brokerages that are not members of the realtors that will allow you to be able to practice real estate to a certain degree, whether just for referrals or actually full service real estate, without having to pay all those extra fees. Because that way, if you don't really get much done because you are just kind of doing this part-time side hustle type of thing, you're not out $1,000 just because you wanted to be able to call yourself a realtor and be able to have all the shiny tools that you don't even really know how to use because you never even made time to do the trainings for them. And so a lot of people are really excited to dive headfirst into real estate, but you know what happens if you dive headfirst into a shallow pool. You don't want to do that. You got to check the depth. You got to know how to figure out whether or not this is a safe place to dive into so you don't hurt yourself. And that's more of what the business planning that you'll do in the post-licensing versus the laws and rules that are more the focus of the exam and your pre-licensing here. So look, that's about all the time we've got for today. Let's see any other questions on here. Congrats on getting that video on demand course done, Lisa. So proud of you there. We got Oksana taking the post-licensing tomorrow. Congratulations on getting that done there. You know, it's not going to teach you everything in real estate. As a matter of fact, it might just open up more questions in your head than you have right now even, but it's because it's going to open your mind to so many different ideas and perspectives that you might not even have considered yet, but that form the basic foundation of running an effective real estate business. So this post-licensing, the sooner you could get into it, the better. Make sure you're licensed though, because if you do this before you're licensed, you don't get credit. Still great information, but you can't put any of it to use if you don't have a license. So get your license and then get enrolled right away in post-licensing. We've got a lot of live schedules right now on top of the video on demand program. So any questions you have about that or any of the programs that we offer here at the Tampa School of Real Estate, whether you're getting your real estate license, post-licensing, or whatever that may be, maybe it's just continuing education, call us up, 813-333-2676. Again, that's 813-333-2676. It's about all the time we've got for today. Thanks again for joining in. We'll be back next Friday for another episode of State of Real Estate. Until then, have an epic weekend, and I'll see you next Friday. So you just got your real estate license. How can you jumpstart your real estate business? the number one thing you should do before you do anything else is post-licensing. Now look, this is already a requirement, so you're gonna have to do it anyways, but here's why you wanna do it early. The sooner you do post-licensing, the sooner you're gonna learn the real-world concepts in post-licensing that will help you create a business plan, that'll help you plan for your success in real estate. Post-licensing is all about real-world topics that are usable, that'll help you grow your real estate business. And at Tampa School of Real Estate, we have the best post-licensing courses around. Find out more about how post-licensing can help you jumpstart your real estate career. Go to postflorida.com. Have you been thinking about getting your Florida real estate license? Look, the process is probably easier than you think. We break it down step by step, how much it's going to cost, what it is that you need to do to get your Florida real estate license. Find out all of that and more at licensefl.com. Again, that's licensefl.com.
The most powerful tool to study for your real estate exam is the Question Simulator from Tampa School of Real Estate. We've used our years of experience in preparing students for the Florida real estate exam to bring you the most powerful exam study tool available. In the Question Simulator, you'll be able to go directly to a particular unit so you can focus on the sections where you need the most practice. We have also included the percentages of each unit so you know which units are the most important for your real estate exam. Every question will immediately give you detailed feedback, which is almost always more important than the question or the answer themselves. After completing all the questions in a particular unit, you can go through question by question and review any that you've gotten wrong. You could also print out a report at the end of each quiz. The Question Simulator from Tampa School of Real Estate is 100% mobile compatible, so you can practice with test questions anywhere you have your phone with you. Enroll now at questionsimulator.com and get ready to pass your exam.
Are you studying for your Florida real estate exam? If you are, you need to check out our Pass First Try strategy. You're gonna love this. It's 4 steps that we break down the process to study for your Florida real estate exam. So you're set up to pass your Florida real estate exam because that's what you're studying for, right? To pass your exam. It's 4 steps. Number 1, you learn the information. You've got to learn this to be able to pass the exam, but it doesn't stop at learning. Step 2, you've got to reinforce the basic, simple, key concepts. As you learn this information, keep reviewing the simple things. You don't need to know everything, but you got to review these basic key concepts. Step 3, you've got to test your knowledge. The exam's going to test your knowledge, so if you don't test your knowledge in advance, you won't find out if you know what you think you know until you take the exam. And then step 4 is be confident and prepared, because even if you know this material, you need to be confident that you know the material. Check out the full strategy at passfirsttry.com. That's passfirsttry.com.